access to the application. I don't know when we presented today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I just submitted it. Yes.
So is anybody besides Austin expecting to present today? No? Okay. Okay. Looks like everyone's done with the quiz. All right, so we'll have a break after the lecture. Austin will do his presentation. If anybody has their chapter 9 or any other problem sets to turn in, you don't have to do it now, but at the break or as you walk out. So we're back on track just about with the practice problem. So today's the last day. I'll take 9. Well, let me rephrase that. Today's the last day. I'll take 9 for full credit or any of the other problem sets. Going forward, they'll be due the Tuesday. So chapter 10 will be due next Tuesday for full credit. And at any time after that, I'll take half the credit off. We're coming up on the midterm. Next Tuesday, we'll do a little bit of review and prep. And then on Thursday, we'll do the midterm. Let's see, I won't be here that Thursday, but I have a proctor going to come in to hand out the test and watch you and then collect the test. It's on paper, so we'll bring pen or pencil. And it's not open book, not open anything. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
How many questions I want to do now?
It's about like 10. I don't have it in front of me. I'm trying to remember. It's about like 10 or 15 true or false, and then another 15 or so problems, just like the practice problems. So some of them might be fill out a chart. Some might be, give me a short answer. Yeah.
I'm not sure if those questions any more similar to like the quizzes we take.
Yeah, maybe a little easier, but yeah.
Okay.
I think the quiz questions are easy. But then again, I'm an expert in the field. So I know some of you don't. In fact, I was just looking at today's scores, and today's scores were pretty bad. And it was the same with the other class. So I know everyone keeps asking me, are you going to drop like the lowest score of the quiz at the end of the semester? And I think I'm going to do that, mainly because so many people are missing class. That I don't want to penalize people for having COVID or being quarantined. So at the end of the semester, I'll drop at least one of the lowest quiz scores. Okay, any other questions about the midterm? Any questions about the practice problems? Okay, well, let's talk about savings. All right, see if you guys can keep your eyes open. I think today's lecture is kind of boring myself. The last class none of them could focus, and I think it's a rough week and rough time of day and a rough, boring subject. So hopefully you guys can do a little better. But it's not you if this is uninteresting. It's just not very interesting. Okay, well, let's talk about savings and investing. So as I kind of hinted at last week, savings and investing are the same thing, right? It's because how the financial system works. Unless you're taking money out of the financial system to like put it on your mattress, then anything you do with your money, the savings wise, translates into investing. So if you put your money in a savings account in the bank, well, the bank turns around and loans that money out. If you buy stocks or bonds, that's a direct form of investing. So savings equals investing. And with the exception of a few things like infrastructure, like roads, most investment in a country is private investment, comes from companies, a little bit from you, households, but mostly from companies, right? So what do companies invest, borrowing money for a new factory? We're mostly going to focus on borrowing, but it's not always borrowing like you think of it. If a company makes a bunch of money and they have a bunch of cash sitting there, that cash belongs to the owners of the company, maybe shareholder, there's a private company, somebody actually owns it. And if they use that money to then buy a factory or build a factory, they're borrowing and they're using their own savings essentially to invest. So it's not always about borrowing. It's sometimes, if you're using your own money to do something, it's money that could have been spent. So you're not spending it, you're investing it. Oh, and then, we'll go over that in a second. Okay, so savings always equals investment. So as shorthand in this class as a basic principle, but just how the economy works, right? Savings always equals investment. And it's really not that hard of a concept if you think about it like this, and that's, you can only do two things with money. If you have money, you can spend it or you can save it. So that's only two things. So if you're spending, that's not investing, right? But if you're saving, that's investing through a bank account or through a stock purchase. Or in the case of a company, buying a new factory or building a new distribution center with their money, that's an investment. Okay, the book likes to go through this complicated math problem. I don't know why they think this is simpler. I don't. This makes my eyes glaze over. But essentially what they're trying to get at is that we take our GDP formula, consumer spending plus investment plus government spending, and then we're kind of eliminating exports and imports just for simplicity. Right, this is the total economic activity of a country, gross domestic product. Right, two of them are spending, one's investing. Right, so and they're trying to like chop it off and mix it all up so they can get to this final conclusion here that savings equals investing. I don't know, if you could follow the logic in the book if you haven't read it yet. It doesn't make any sense to me, but there is some logic there. Okay. So private people and private companies can save, which equals invest. But so can governments. So governments do it by taking the money that they're taxing, the money is coming in, and then they spend so much money. And if they're spending more than they're taking in, that's a budget deficit, which is a form of borrowing. And if they're spending less than they're taking in, that's a budget surplus. And if it's the same, with a balanced budget, don't see that very often. And then once we understand this government piece, we can add that into private savings / investment, and we get the national savings. So national savings is adding government savings, so your government deficit or budget, to the amount of private. National savings national equals savings government plus savings private. And how do we get this savings government number? We take savings government and it equals our tax, our tax revenue minus our tax transfers. This is like Social Security. Minus our government spending. So together they equal our national savings, which also happens to equal our investment as a nation. Okay, just as a reminder, what investment is, different capital is physical capital. Physical things you buy, a laptop, car, tractor, factory. Human capital, investing in humans, so education and skills development. And financial capital. All right, we kind of skipped over this one. This is the money. The money available in your savings accounts and your stocks. Money in the financial markets. Okay. So it's not just your money that's used for the investment into this economy, the United States economy. It's not just the money of American businesses. We also can track money that's coming in from foreign sources. So the United States is a very stable, growth-oriented economy. So a lot of foreign investors, private businesses, even foreign countries, governments, invest in the United States. Buy stocks in American companies, park their money into American banks. And of course, Americans will invest in foreign countries or in companies in foreign countries. And so if you take what we're investing there and you look at what foreigners are investing here, you have this net capital inflow. So the United States is almost always an inflow. We're a very strong economy, so people like to put their money here. So we have more money coming into our economy for investment than we have going out. All right, so net capital inflow is the import minus the export. More of this really weird, trying to do math to economics. This is like a weird way to do it, I think. Not how I learned it, maybe that's what I don't like. So in the end result, though, is your investment spending for this country is your national savings plus your net capital inflow. So the total amount of investment spending in this country is national savings, which we already learned is private savings, plus or minus deficit / surplus of our government, plus net capital inflow. So if there's a $1 trillion in private savings and investment accounts, and then the budget deficit is negative 250, and then we have 500 million coming in net capital, then our national investment is 1.25 trillion. Okay? And so trying to get the total amount happening in this country. Here's how that looks, comparing a couple countries here, United States versus Germany. So as you can see, the United States, here's investment spending here, and this is how the bulk of it, right, is private savings. And then on the top here, we have our capital inflow. Right? We're this very strong economy, so foreigners invest or you just use our banking system, our financial markets. We have this, but then we run a big deficit. versus Germany, who bulk is private savings, that they run a budget surplus for government spending. But then look below the line, they have a ton of capital outflow. This is Germans saving or investing in other countries. So it's the opposite of us. Notice how this is labeled. Open economies. Well, what's open about them? Open means that money can go in and out. If they're closed, which there really aren't any closed economies, except for maybe like North Korea, then foreigners couldn't invest in this economy and locals couldn't invest in foreign. Okay, so what are the mechanics of this? It's really complicated, but for simplicity, we just say the financial markets. What are financial markets? Well, it's the banking system, it's the stock market system, it's the commodity markets. Lots of different channels of this, but for simplicity, it's just the financial markets. Bring together borrowers and savers. Savers are households and businesses, and borrowers are mostly businesses for investment purposes. Okay, so the financial markets, like we said, we're using this is simplistic financial markets. But the main focus of financial markets through different channels is the loanable funds market, which again is just a simplified kind of made up term to talk about when you borrow money. So what's the price of borrowing money? What's the interest rate? So if I want a new car, the bank will give me the money and I pay it back, the money they lend me plus the interest rate. And for this class, and in real life, we're talking about nominal interest rates. And we learned about real. Real is when you take consideration inflation, but that's not how we look at interest rates. So when you go borrow money for a mortgage or a car, they don't give you the real interest rate, they give you the nominal. And just like for this purposes, we normally almost deal in nominal interest rates. Let's look at how this graphs out. So this is very similar to what we learned in chapter 3, supply and demand. And here's interest rate, and here's quantity. If that looks familiar, why is this not price? Well, interest rate is the price of the loanable funds. So it's the same thing. It's just we're specifying, we're talking about the price, aka the interest rate of a loan. And this is the demand curve. It goes down, just like any other demand curve. Why? Well, because as interest rates go down, we demand more loans. So if interest rate is low, like this says, this example is 4%, because this book's this edition's a few years old now. Right now, you can get a car for 1.75% interest, for example, or 2%. So if interest rate's 2% for a car, then I'm going to go out and I'm going to borrow $60,000 to buy a new Tesla. Because I can borrow more. It's cheap. But let's say interest rates go back up and they go up, here's to 12%. I no longer want the Tesla, the 60,000 quantity of loan funds. I can only borrow 20,000 now because I want less. So people demand to borrow more money as interest rates go down, and they want less money as interest rates go up. And it's the same thing. Oh, yeah.
Would the time period also affect the amount of interest rates or the quantity that is demanded?
Yes, it definitely would. And that's normally considered, well, that's a great lead into the next point. But yes, that's normally factored in the risk the risk calculation as far as the interest rate. So the longer the loan period, the more risk there is, you have more years to get to default and stop paying. So typically that's factored into the interest rate. So when we're looking at this, this was all things else being equal. So we would be looking at 12% a year for similar types of loans. If for example, well, we'll get to shifts in the curve, but if a shift in the curve might be looking at if car loans used to be four years on average and now they're 6 years on average, so that longer life cycle shifts the demand out of every interest rate. All right. Yeah, so but good point, which actually leads us into the present value calculation. So this is a concept, if you take finance classes, which most of you will if you're in the business school, it's a finance concept and we use it in economics. And that's that a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow or a dollar next year. Right? Does anybody have an idea why that might be? Yeah.
We can invest it and turns more dollars.
That is the exact right answer. No, most people say inflation, which is a great answer. It's a great real world answer, but that's not the reason. The reason why a dollar today is more valuable than a dollar in a year is because if I have it today, I have more options. I could buy lunch with it today, or I can invest in the stock market. Right? I could do more things. A dollar a year from now, I could do a lot less things today. So it's a lot less valuable to me. So to understand how the value of a dollar is more valuable when it's in my hand today is we need to look at the present value. So in economics terms, we need to look at how much money you need today to equal what you want in a year when you add in that interest. So I like this example down here, right? So if in a year, I want $1,000 and interest rates right now are 10% a year, then I only need $909 today to invest to earn that $91 in interest. So I have 1,001 a year. So those are the three pieces of information you need for present value. You only need two of them, but all three are the complete picture. What I have today, what the interest rate is, and what I'll have at the end of the time period. And so if I'm the saver and I have 10%, a 10% return, I put in 909 now, I'll have 1,000 in a year. But if I'm the borrower and I borrow 909, that means I'll pay back 1,000 in a year. So, and we'll think through this a little bit more, but why is this important? Well, it's also partly important because if I'm a business and I'm borrowing, right? Because that's what most investment is from, businesses. If I'm a business and I'm investing, I'm only going to invest if the interest rate is lower than what I'm expecting to profit. So if the new factory is going to make an 8% return based on my estimates, but interest rate is 10%, I'll lose 2% on the money I borrow. So I wouldn't do that. That's what this last sentence is. More projects are worth it as interest rates fall. That's what's important about interest rates. It spurs investment when that investment is cheaper to invest in something than it is that you'll profit from. And if you take a finance class, you'll spend half the class learning how to do these kind of calculations. Okay, so let's talk about the supply. So just like on chapter 3, supply always goes up. Why? because as interest rates go up, you're willing to supply a lot more money, right? So this is you. This is you as the investor. This is you putting your money in a bank account or buying in stocks in the stock market. If I have $10,000 right now, what can I do with it? Well, I could go on a cruise to Alaska. Right? I could buy lots of things. Or I could put it into some kind of investment. So if the investment is putting it into a bank savings account that's paying 0.5% of interest over a year, that's, $5 over a year. Well, I'd rather just go to Alaska. But if I could find a return that's 12%, and I could make $1,200 over the year, I'll postpone that trip to Alaska. Right. So as interest rates go up, people will want to reallocate a lot more money to loaning it out. So supply in this case, again, remember, is you. Demand is the business that wants to borrow money to build a factory or whatever, and supply is you, or it's the business that made lots of profit and wants to take some of that profit and put it into make a return on investment. Yeah, so why does it slope up? Well, because you're more willing to forego consumption, buying something, and make a loan when the interest rate's higher. So you put them together and you get an equilibrium interest rate. So this is where the most amount of suppliers are willing to supply loanable funds, and the most amount of demanders are willing to borrow money, and you get this interest rate. So all supply and demand. Now we hear on the news all the time, the federal government or the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. Well, how does that work if it's all set by supply and demand? Well, we're going to learn after spring break, we're going to learn about how the Fed sets interest rate. But what the Fed is setting interest rate is actually not any interest rate that any of us care about or affects us. They're setting the interest rate on that banks can use to borrow from each other or borrow from the federal government. And they are not setting interest rates on your car loan or your business loan. That's all set by supply and demand. Pure, how much people are willing to loan and how much people are willing to borrow. All right, so this has some implications. So on the demand side, above the equilibrium point, you're not going to invest in any projects that pay less than that. So if your project is, if you're gonna open up an office in China and you're expecting to make 10% returns, you're not going to borrow money to do that at 12%. Would you do it at 8%? Probably. What if you're expecting returns down here? So the same thing with the normal supply and demand from chapter 3 is that when we're talking about here, we're only talking about two factors: the price, also known as the interest rate, and the quantity demanded. So this only shows us what happens if the interest rate changes, how it affects quantity demanded. It doesn't show us anything else. But we live in the real world where there are other things And when those other things happen, we have a whole shift in the curve. So here, demand curve is shifting right. What causes that? Lots of things cause it. The book uses two examples. Changes in perceived business opportunities. So the example given is the dot-com boom of the 90s. Have any of you lived through it? I did. Internet came out in the mid-90s. Everyone knew it was big. Everyone knew how it was going to change everything. No one knew how. So people borrowed money. Companies borrowed money to build out infrastructure. Companies borrowed money to build new businesses to take advantage of it. And what happened is that change in this unprecedented change in expectation of how business will be done made people borrow at every interest rate. They wanted more at every interest rate. It didn't matter how much it cost to borrow. They wanted to be a part of the internet. Right, and then changes in government borrowing is the other one and what this does is this can lead to crowding out. So there's only so much money to be lent out. There's $1 trillion in private money to be lent out. That's all there is. So if the government's running a $250 billion deficit, which is low these days, but let's just use that for the example, there's only $1 trillion. So to lend out on all existence. So the first 250 is that is going to go to the government. And why goes to the government? Well, mainly because the government is going to pay you back. There's no risk to it. And the Congress tries every year to not raise the debt ceiling, which is risky, but we all know they're going to. It's just a political stunt. And so the government soaks up that 250, which makes the rest of the money available to be loaned out to everyone else only 750, which reduces the supply, right? Shifts the supply curve. It's called crowding out. Raises interest rates, except when the economy is already depressed. Then that has the effect of not raising interest rates per se, but stimulating the economy. Okay, and then you can have the same thing here. I'll tell you what, let's pick this up on Thursday at this point. Let's take a quick break so we're nice and refreshed to have Austin come up and do his presentation. So we'll stop here, come back on Thursday. Well, this is Thursday. So 5 minutes and then Austin will come up. Okay, there. All right, Austin, go ahead and come up and tell us all about the paradox.
Okay. Hi, I'm Austin Stratton, and we're going to be talking about the productivity paradox and what's wrong with Italy. So first off, the productivity paradox. So it's like in the world of technology, there's a thing called like Moore's law, which says like every 2 years our processing power will double, which is true. Every 2 years we see it double, but it's not really reflected in our productivity. We actually kind of see it fluctuate a lot, despite our technology increasing. So actually during the computer boom of the 1980s, we don't really see a big jump in productivity. It's not until 1990s where that kind of big jump occurs. So why is this? That's where the productivity paradox comes in. It states that there's a difference between having a new technology and knowing what to do with it. So during the 1980s, when computers were new, companies didn't really know how to take advantage of the processing power. It wasn't until years down the line when they kind of figured out, okay, we can use this for inventory, file management, and kind of they found a way to make it productive for them. So why is it in this chapter? GDP is heavily dependent on how productive their workers are. So in this graph, it shows two different lines. The red one is productivity using 1945 technology, and the purple line is productivity with 2015 technology. So just because of the productivity and technology they have at the time, it's two drastically different real GDPs per worker based on physical capital invested in each one. So now we have what's the matter with Italy? So during 19th to 20th century, Italy was actually a pretty poor country. And it wasn't until like after World War II during the 1950s to 1990s, where the GDP actually quadrupled and actually surpassed Britain's GDP. And between like 1990 and the early 2000s, it became stagnant. And after 2008, it actually began to fall. So why did this happen? So one reason is the European debt crisis, but the more prevalent reason is because of, I guess, their culture. They prioritize seniority over kind of moving on into, I guess, the newer things. So then that kind of discouraged new workers kind of joining the workforce, and having the young adults kind of get educated. It just really discouraged them from kind of, it's discouraged them from getting educated, which kind of lowered their total GDP. So why is it in this chapter? Basically, it kind of highlights how culture can affect a whole nation's GDP. I think that's it. Okay. Thank you.
All right, great. So this, the productivity paradox, this I think I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about memes on the internet. And what I was thinking about is that a new meme will come along. And at first it's something different. There's something there that catches your eye, but they're not great. And it actually takes a few iterations of the new meme before it's good. Right. And that's what's happening in the productivity paradox, is because it takes a while for people to figure out how to best exploit that meme for the funniest or the most insightful comments. It's the same thing with productivity. Something new comes out, kind of know there's something there to it, but it takes us a few years to figure out how to really increase efficiency and productivity with that new technology. Okay. Well, I really wasn't planning on getting done this early, but I'm not going to keep you just to keep you. So I guess I'll see you Thursday.